Hello and welcome to this week's video. My name is Anuska Taylor. Thank you so much for joining me. And today's topic is really important topic, and it's really fundamental to my private voice coaching and my whole philosophy around the voice is, are you choosing conformity over authenticity when you speak? If you are choosing conformity over authenticity, it is not going to feel good. It's not going to feel good emotionally. You're probably going to feel a lot of anger and resentment and frustration, maybe a lot of sadness. And, you might have got quite good at pushing it away, but it's not going to feel good in your body. And all that tends to happen is it will manifest in some way in the body. The more we suppress, the more it will come out in pain, in physical illness and disease, or even more serious mental health issues. So we really owe it to ourselves and those around us to be authentic when we speak. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this and what it is and what it isn't, because I think my definition of authenticity is probably quite different to what's out there in social media. This word is such a buzzword, everyone uses it, but in my experience, it's often used in a very superficial way. So for me, this is a much deeper, more profound shift that has to occur. And from my perspective, the voice will follow. The more you connect with the truth of who you are, the more authentic you really are at your core, the more that will follow through your voice. And actually, what we tend to do in our modern society is we want the quick tips, the quick fixes. Give me a quick exercise, give me a quick tool. And that's all great. But if you don't shift what's going on within, you're not going to get the result. You're not going to be able to maintain it. There's going to be a lot of frustration with it. It's got to come from within, as within, so without. So before I get going, if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and also do like, comment, and share if you enjoy my videos. So I'm going to start with a quote from Carl Jung. For those of you that know my work and have watched any of my videos before, you will know that his work forms the basis of the sort of psychology behind my voice coaching. And I'm going to share a quote as the sort of basis for today's video. And Jung says the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half of life is going inward and letting go of it. So what does he mean by this? That's what I want to talk about today, and how this kind of relates to your voice and why it matters so much. If you are serious about truly stepping into your power as a speaker, truly accessing your authenticity as a speaker, this is the path. Unfortunately, it's not an easy path, but it's the path you have to go down. So let's just talk briefly about the formation of the ego, which starts very young. So when we're born, when we come into the world, we really believe we are part of our mother. And it's only around 6 to 9 months that we start to realize we are actually separate from our mother. So that's really where a lot of this fear and anxiety starts to come in. We start to become very attached. We start to really fear being abandoned, left, ignored. And obviously, from a baby's perspective, this is literally life or death. This is really, if my mother or my caregiver ignores me, I'm going to die. I'm going to die of starvation. I mean, and even they've done studies around babies that don't get enough physical, emotional nurturance. They're not picked up and given hugs and kisses and held. So it's not just about food and water and shelter, but it's the whole enchilada. Like, we need that care and attention from our caregivers in every capacity from a young age. And we know this on some level. We know that this is really important. So this is driving us. And so everything then from that age really becomes about, how do I get my needs met? And obviously, as a baby, there's a lot of screaming. There's a lot of, because that's really all we've got at that age, is to make a lot of noise to get our needs met. And if I just keep crying and screaming, eventually someone will notice me and give me a hug or feed me or change my nappy or whatever, fill in the blank. But what tends to happen when we're not conscious and we don't go within is we're still almost operating from that childlike self as an adult. So we think that because we're in an adult body now and we've got a good job and we might have our own family and our home, etc., that this isn't operating, but it is really still operating. This really strong desire to fit in, to be accepted, and to adapt. And so this ego starts to be formed, and it's really a shapeshifter. It will kind of bring whatever representative it needs to bring to the table to get our needs met, which is why we can, act differently in different situations, because we have different needs in different situations. But it's really driving us. And you can see how this can be helpful, which is why Jung says the first half of life, we want to develop a healthy ego, because if we don't have a healthy ego, we're not going to survive. So it's really, really important. So this could go up to early 30s. Through our 20s, we're still developing a healthy ego. I think that's also why, certainly for me, our 20s can be a really challenging time, because we're still very attached to what people think of us. We still really crave that social acceptance. We still really care what other people think, whether it's particularly our peers, actually, but peers, family, colleagues, etc. We really, really care so deeply because of this survival instinct that we have learned that this is the way to keep us safe. So the ego isn't the enemy. You can see that it's really, really helpful. It has a place for all of us. And we all have it. We all have an ego. It is not a personality trait, although it has been sort of misused in that way. We can all be egoic because we all have an ego. So it's really just about this desire to get our needs met, to fit in, to be accepted. Now, that is going to look different for different people. For some people, being accepted is just being shy and not speaking up and just, flying under the radar. For other people, being accepted is about demanding attention, demanding respect. And that could come through in very loud, domineering, aggressive voices. So it looks different for different people. And it will really depend on your conditioning and your upbringing as to what that looks like. The point is, you're not really free, because it's this conditioning that's driving you, whether it's driving a more loud, domineering, aggressive self, or whether it's driving a more shy, quiet, reflective self. It's your conditioning that's driving. So it's not really who you are. Now, how does this show up in the voice then? Because this is really interesting. So then we can think about, in this stage of our life, childhood, teenage years, 20s, early 30s even, everything is about conforming. Everything is about fitting in. What do I have to do to get my needs met? What do I have to do to feel like a normal, quote unquote, functioning human being in society? Again, it's going to be different for different people. But it might be, I need to get married, I need to have children, I need to buy the house with a white picket fence. I need to tick society's boxes, and then I'll be okay, then I'll feel safe. But that might not actually be what you really want on a deep level. It's just what you've been conditioned to believe is what you want. But from a voice perspective, it's really interesting, because our vocal habits are also then about fitting in, are about being accepted, and they're very much about being socially adaptive. So I'll give you an example from my own life. And I studied at Leeds University. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the UK, Leeds is a big city in the north of the country. I'm originally, well, I live in London, but I'm from the south. So there's always been this kind of weird north-south divide in this country. And often northerners would sort of think of southerners as sort of posh southerners, and then northerners might be perceived more as the working class, and the south be more perceived as the posh, rich part of the country, which is all rubbish now. It's all changed. There's rich and poor people everywhere. However, that was still, certainly when I was at university, still very much driving the narrative. And I had my voice right now, a kind of quote unquote posh Southern voice. And I remember going to Leeds University, and people literally said I sounded posh when I spoke. And it was said in a very derogatory way. It was not a compliment. It was like, it wasn't socially adaptive for me to sound posh. And so I do remember very, very distinctly trying to sound less posh when I opened my mouth. obviously that wasn't me being authentic. That was about me trying to conform versus me just owning my voice. You know, I'm from the South. This is the accent that I have versus, okay, I actually need to try and change this accent to fit in. And that's what I did. And I started to sort of try and sound a little bit less posh, for want of a better word, so that I would fit in. Now, we all do this to a greater or lesser extent. Sometimes we're very conscious of it, sometimes we're not. But it's happening all the time, and it's happening in terms of how loud do we allow ourselves to be, how expressive, how much power do we allow into our voice? You know, what's the ease in our voice? Do we mumble? Do we speak very monotone? Like, it's all very much driven by this conditioning, because your authentic voice, your true voice, is open, free, powerful, and expressive, regardless of accent. So if you're in the UK, if you're from the South, or if you're from the North, if you're from Leeds, or you're from wherever, it doesn't matter, because it's not really about the accent. It's about how open the voice is, how free the voice is, and how expressive the voice is. So start to think about that in your own life, because it will absolutely be there. Where do I put the brakes on? Where am I using my voice to conform versus authentically show up? And I'm sure anyone that's sort of lived abroad will probably have had similar experiences themselves. I've certainly heard Northerners that come and live in London feel a similar thing in a different way. So we've all experienced it. I also lived in Australia, so I had the things around my accent as well, living in Australia. So it's there for us all. But just start to notice, where do I use my voice to try and fit in and conform versus just show up authentically? But as Carl Jung said, you know, this first half of life really is developing a healthy ego, really, really important. But then we have to start to see that this isn't who we really are. It never was. It was very much a protective mechanism of the mind to help us survive. It's very survival based. As we talked about, as a baby, this is the mechanism that we start to adopt to get our needs met, to feel safe and secure in the world. And so it will take us to a certain point. And normally life will force you to face it. And then you have a choice. Do I go down this path and actually start to come to terms with who I really am? Or do I just go back to living from ego? And, you know, there's plenty of people that will stay living in their conditioning for the rest of their life. They really believe they are their ego. They really believe that's their personality. I am just shy. I am just loud. I am just aggressive. I am just weak and meek and mild. Fill in the blank. But truthfully, we're all everything. It's what we sort of choose to lead with. So this is where my work is so important, because then you can choose how you show up, because your true self, this true sense of who you are, this authentic self, this true self, is this essence of you, is this life force that's been there from day one and has never changed, has never shifted. So the ego is a shapeshifter, as I said before. It will adapt, it will move, it will go with whatever shiny object it thinks is going to get its needs met in that particular moment. So we all know through our life, you know, we've changed our hair color, our bodies change, we wear different clothes depending on what's in season or trendy, etc. We have different preferences, our viewpoints change. You know, as a child we believe in Father Christmas and then suddenly we don't. So I'm using that as a very basic example, but you can see how the ego shape shifts and adapts, and things change, and we physically change, and we're in different relationships. We're attracted to different people in our 20s than maybe when we were 15, for example. You know, those types of things, which are very driven from the ego, change. But the core essence of who we are never changes. And that is your true self. That is your authentic self. So the conditioning for all of us is driven by the ego. And so the ego is very black, white, good, bad, right, wrong, up, down. There is no gray with the ego. It's either you're good or you're bad, or you're right or you're wrong. And so that really shows up also in our expression. And so what you'll often see is it's two sides of the same coin, but essentially people who tend to err on the side of avoiding conflict, and they don't speak up, they don't express what they really feel, they suppress something that's really important to them because they don't want to rock the boat, they don't want to upset people because that's what they've been taught. That was my conditioning for sure. Then you've got people on the other side of the coin, but it's still driven from ego because they're both driven from fear. They're both driven from separation and fear. Is I'm just going to force you to listen to me. I'm just going to like bulldoze over the conversation. You will listen to me, and I will scream and shout at you, and I will swear at you, and I will do whatever I have to do to get you to listen to me. So there's a real kind of aggressive, domineering quality. Now, again, I'm going to the extremes of this so you can see, but most of us tend to favor one side or the other. Most of the people I work with are probably more on the end of my conditioning, which is avoid conflict at all costs. It doesn't matter whether it's really eating away at you inside, just don't rock the boat, just don't upset people, just don't say how you really feel. And I was literally told that as a child. It's like, I don't care what you think, Anuska, just don't upset your brother, just don't upset your sister, just stuff it, which was literally what I was taught. Really unhealthy, but obviously we've got very unconscious parents mostly, so this isn't to blame them, they're just responding to their own conditioning, but it's not healthy. And then we grow up and we learn that it's not safe to express ourselves, there are negative consequences, we won't be loved, we won't be accepted, we won't get our needs met. So all of those childlike fears are still driving us. So again, think about what side of the fence am I on from a conditioning perspective? Is it I tend to avoid conflict and I shut down and maybe I run away, literally or metaphorically. I don't phone the person back. I don't have a direct conversation. I just avoid speaking to them at all costs. Or am I the other side of the coin where I'm just like, right, we're going to talk about this and I'm going to scream and shout at you until you listen to me. So, as I say, they're two extremes, but they're two sides of the same coin because they're both driven from separation. They're both driven from fear. So that's not what I'm talking about here. The true self lies somewhere in the middle. Sometimes we will have to have perhaps a more challenging conversation with someone. We might have to speak with more power, more assertiveness, more authority. But other times it could be more about sharing what we feel and then listening and taking a step back and listening and really, really actively listening to that person from a place of curiosity, from a place of love, from a place of openness. So if you have a fear of conflict, you can never be authentic in any relationship because you're always going to be hiding. You're never going to be expressing yourself fully. And so part of this integration that we have to go through if we want to truly step into our authenticity, which we start to go through in our mid-30s, this is part of the journey. It's part of this integration of, if you're me, allowing a little bit more assertiveness and authority into your voice, into how you show up. But maybe if you're on the other side of the fence, it's allowing a bit more vulnerability and actually just taking a step back and maybe listening to people more. So in our 30s and beyond, if we aren't proactive with this process, life will kind of force us to look at it. And we will start to feel unfulfilled in life, even if we have everything, quote unquote, that our ego said we needed to feel safe in the world, to feel accepted. We've got the good job, we've got the husband, the wife, the children, the house, but we still feel unfulfilled. It's because it's been driven from ego and it's not really been driven from that authentic self. So life will force you. And so for me, it was the death of my parents. For other people, some of my people in my life, like they might get a cancer diagnosis or someone else in their family might get some kind of serious illness. And it wakes you up. It wakes you up from this sleepwalking that we basically all do through life. And this sleepwalking that we really believe in this illusion that is the ego. So this is really about waking up to the illusion of the ego without getting rid of the ego. And so one of the ways that we do that is through self-inquiry. is starting to sort of challenge our beliefs, our thoughts, the stories that we tell ourselves, and just becoming curious to the patterns and the people, the voices that trigger you, where you put the brakes on in your voice, where do you hold back, where do you run away, where do you not express yourself, or where do you go in like a bull in a china shop and you don't ever give other people an opportunity to express themselves, and you're on the defensive and it's very, very almost aggressive. So I challenge you just to start to open your mind a little bit, start to become curious about your thoughts, your feelings, how you use your voice, how you respond to other people, where you put the brakes on, where you hold yourself back, where you go in like a bull in a china shop, where do you assume the worst? Start to pay attention, because that's all really pointing to your conditioning. And then when you really start to access this, reclaim this authentic self, which we always had, but as I said, it kind of gets lost as we're growing up in terms of trying to fit in, then it's really then about how can I start to integrate this? How can I start to choose how I show up, choose how I use my voice? And then what happens is when you do the voice exercises, there's going to just be so much more power behind it, because you're not at war within. You know, you're not trying to build more authority and power in the voice, but unconsciously it's like, no, but I have to avoid conflict. I can't upset people. So this is why it's so important, because otherwise you've got one foot on the brake, one foot on the accelerator. So start to question this. But if you are interested in this in a deeper way, this is really the essence of my 8-month private voice coaching program, Speak with Impact. We look at both the sort of the physical side of the voice, the technical, the functional aspects of voice, but we also look at this. And you absolutely need both. You cannot create lasting change without both of them. So if you're serious about really discovering the truth of who you are and wanting to step into your power as a speaker from a authentic place, not an ego defensive place, this is the work for you. But it isn't for everyone. You've got to be ready for it. And as I say, normally people start to find this kind of work early to mid 30s. That's when they start to realize that this conditioning, maybe not consciously, but this conditioning has got me this far, but there's something missing. There's something I'm not happy with in my life. I've got everything I thought I was meant to have to be happy, and I'm still not happy. And that's when you know the ego is driving. But not to beat yourself up, because the ego is driving all of our lives for the first half of our life. So I hope this has been helpful. Do leave a comment if you have any comments or questions. Do get in contact with me if I can help you, and I'll see you on the next video.